Lives of the Most Eminent Painters, Sculptors, and Architects by Giorgio Vasari.
Life of Jacopo Sansovino. Description of the works of Jacopo Sansovino, sculptor of Florence. The while that Andrea Contucci, the sculptor of Monte Sansovino, having already acquired in Italy and Spain the name of the most excellent sculptor and architect that there was in art after Buonarroti, was living in Florence in order to execute the two figures of marble that were to be placed over that door of the temple of St. Giovanni, which faces toward the Misericordia. A young man was entrusted to him to be taught the art of sculpture, the son of Antonio di Jacopo Tatti, whom nature had endowed with a great genius, so that he gave much grace to the things that he did in relief. Whereupon Andrea, having recognized how excellent in sculpture the young man was destined to become, did not fail to teach him with all possible care all those things which might make him known as his disciple. And so, loving him very dearly, and doing his best for him, with much affection, and being loved by the young man with equal tenderness, people judged that the pupil would not only become as excellent as his master, but would by a great measure surpass him. And such were the reciprocal friendliness and love between these two, as it were between father and son, that Jacopo in those early years began to be called no longer Tatti, but Sansovino, and so he has always been and always will be. Now Jacopo, beginning to exercise his hand, he was so assisted by nature in the things that he did, that although at times he did not use much study and diligence in his work, nevertheless in what he did there could be seen facility, sweetness, grace, and a certain delicacy very pleasing to the eyes of a craftsman, insomuch that his every sketch, rough study, and model has always had a movement and a boldness that nature is wont to give to but few sculptors. Moreover, the friendship and intercourse that Andrea del Sarto and Jacopo Sansovino had with each other in their childhood, and then in their youth, assisted not a little both the one and the other, for they followed the same manner in design, and had the same grace in execution, one in painting and the other in sculpture, and conferring together on the problems of art, and Jacopo making models of figures for Andrea, they gave one another very great assistance. And that this is true a proof is that in the altarpiece of St. Francesco, belonging to the nuns of the Via Pantalini, there is a St. John the Evangelist, which was copied from a most beautiful model in clay that Sansovino made in those days, in competition with Bacchio da Montelupo. For the guild of poor Santa Maria wished to have a bronze statue of 4 braccia made for a niche at the corner of Orsa Michel, opposite to the wool shearers, for which Jacopo made a more beautiful model in clay than Bacchio. But nevertheless it was allotted to Montelupo, from his being an older master, rather than to Sansovino, although his work, young as he was the better. That model, which is a very beautiful thing, is now in the possession of the heirs of Nanni Ungaro, for which Nanni, being then his friend, Sansovino made some models of large boys in clay, and a model for a figure of St. Nicholas of Tolentino, which were all executed of the size of life in wood, with the assistance of Sansovino, and placed in the chapel of that saint in the Church of St. Spirito, becoming known for these reasons to all the craftsmen of Florence, and being considered a young man of fine parts and excellent character. Jacopo was invited by Giuliano da San Gallo, architect to Pope Julius II, to Rome, vastly to his satisfaction, and then, taking extraordinary pleasure in the ancient statues that are in the Belvedere, he set himself to draw them, whereupon Bramante, who was likewise architect to Pope Julius, holding the first place at that time and dwelling in the Belvedere, having seen some drawings by this young man, and a nude recumbent figure of clay in full relief, holding a vessel to contain ink, which he had made, liked them so much that he took him under his protection and ordered him that he should make a large copy in wax of the Laocoon, which he was having copied also by others, in order to take a cast in bronze, namely by Zaccaria Zacchi of Volterra, the Spaniard Alonso Berrughetta, and Vecchio of Bologna. These, when all were finished, Bramante caused to be seen by Raffaello Sanzio of Urbina, in order to learn which of the four had acquitted himself best, whereupon it was judged by Raffaello that Sansovino, young as he was, had surpassed the others by a great measure. Then, by the advice of Cardinal Domenici Grimani, orders were given to Bramante that he should have Jacopo's copy cast in bronze, and so the mold was made, and the work, being cast in metal, came out very well. And afterwards, having been polished, it was given to the cardinal, who held it as long as he lived, not less dear than if it had been the antique. And when he came to die, he left it as a very rare thing to the most serene Signora of Venice, which, having kept it many years in the press of the Hall of the Council of Ten, finally, in the year 1534, presented it to the Cardinal of Lorraine, who took it to France. While Sansovino was acquiring greater fame every day in Rome, with his studies in art being held in much consideration, Giuliano da San Gallo, who had been keeping him in his house in the Borgo Vecchio, fell ill, and when he departed from Rome in a litter, in order to go to Florence for a change of air, a room was found for Jacopo by Bramante, likewise in the Borgo Vecchio, in the palace of Domenico della Rovera, Cardinal of San Clemente, where Pietro Perugino was also dwelling, who at that time was painting for Pope Julius the vaulting of the chamber in the Borgia Tower, whereupon Pietro, having seen the beautiful manner of Sansovino, caused him to make many models in wax for himself, and among them a Christ taken down from the cross in the round, with many ladders and figures, which was a very beautiful thing. This and other things of the same sort, and models of various fantasies, were all collected afterwards by Messer Giovanni Gaddi, and they are now in his house on the Piazza di Madonna in Florence. And these works were the reason that Sansovino became very intimately associated with Maestro Luca Signorelli, the painter of Cortona, with Bramantino di Milano, with Bernardino Pinturicchio, with Cesare Cesarano, who was in repute at that time for his commentaries on Vitruvius, and with many other famous and beautiful intellects of that age. Bramante then, desiring that Sansovino should become known to Pope Julius, arranged to have some antiques restored by him, whereupon Jacopo, setting to work, displayed such diligence and so much grace in restoring them, that the Pope and all who saw them judged that nothing better could be done. These praises so spurred Sansovino to surpass himself, that, having given himself beyond measure to his studies, and being also somewhat delicate in constitution, and suffering from some excess such as young men commit, he became so ill that he was forced for the sake of his life to return to Florence, where, profiting by his native air, by the advantage of his youth, and by the diligence and care of the physicians, in a short time he completely recovered. Now Messer Piero Pitti was arranging at that time to have a Madonna of marble made for that façade of the Mercato Nuovo in Florence, where the clock is, and it appeared to him, since there were in Florence many young men of ability, and also old masters, that the work should be given to that one among them who might make the best model, whereupon one was given to Bacchio da Montelupo to execute, one to Zaccaria Zacchi of Volterra, who had likewise returned to Florence the same year, another to Bacchio Bandinelli, and yet another to Sansovino. And when these were placed in comparison, the honor and the work were given by Lorenzo di Credi, an excellent painter and a person of judgment and probity, and likewise by the other judges, craftsmen and connoisseur, to Sansovino. But although the work was therefore allotted to him, nevertheless so much delay was caused in procuring and conveying the marble for him by the envious machinations of Alvarado di Felicia, who greatly favored Bandinelli and hated Sansovino, that he was ordered by certain other citizens, having perceived that delay, to make one of the large apostles in marble that were going into the Church of St. Maria del Fiore. Wherefore, having made the model of St. James, which model, when the work was finished, came into the possession of Messer Bindo Altovetti, he began that figure and, continuing to work at it with all diligence and study, he carried it to completion so perfectly that it is a miraculous figure and shows in all its parts that it was wrought with incredible study and care. The draperies, arms, and hands being undercut and executed with such art and such grace that there is nothing better in marble to be seen. Thus, Sansovino showed in what way undercut draperies should be executed, having made these so delicate and so natural that in some places he reduced the marble to the thickness that is seen in real folds and the edges and hems of the borders of draperies. A difficult method, and one demanding much time and patience if you wish that it should so succeed as to display the perfection of art. That figure remained in the Office of Works from the time when it was finished by Sansovino until the year 1565, at which time, in the month of December, it was placed in the Church of St. Maria del Fiore to do honor to the coming of Queen Joanna of Austria, the wife of Don Francesco de' Medici, Prince of Florence and Siena, and there it is kept as a very rare work, together with the other apostles, likewise in marble, executed in competition by other craftsmen, as has been related in their lives. At the same time, he made for Messer Giovanni Gaddi a Venus of marble on a shell, of great beauty, as was also the model, which was in the house of Messer Francesco Montevarchi, a friend of these arts, but came to an evil end in the inundation of the river Arno in the year 1558. He also made a boy of tow and a swan as beautiful as could be of marble, by the same Monsieur Giovanni Gaddi, together with many other things which are all in his house. For Messer Bindo Altovetti, he had a chimney-piece of great cost made, all in grey stone, carved by Benedetto da Ravasano, which was placed in his house in Florence, and Messer Bindo caused Sansovino to make a scene with little figures for placing in the frieze of that chimney-piece, with Vulcan and other gods, which was a very rare work, but much more beautiful are two boys of marble that were about the crown of the chimney-piece, holding some arms of the Altovetti in their hands, which have been removed by Signor Don Luigi di Toledo, who inhabits the house of the above-named Messer Bindo, and placed about a fountain in his garden behind the Serviti Friars in Florence. Two other boys of extraordinary beauty, also of marble and by the same hand, who are likewise holding an escutcheon, are in the house of Giovan Francesco Ridolfi. All these works caused Sansovino to be held by the men of art and by all Florence to be a most excellent and gracious master, on which account Giovanni Bartolini, having caused a house to be built in his garden at Galfondo, desired that Sansovino should make for him a young Bacchus in marble, of the size of life, whereupon the model for this was made by Sansovino, and it pleased Giovanni so much that he had him supplied with the marble, and Jacopo began it with such eagerness that his hands and brain flew as he worked. This work, I say, he studied in such a manner, in order to make it perfect, that he set himself to portray from the life, although it was winter, an assistant of his called Pippo del Fabbro, making him stand naked a good part of the day, which Pippo would have become a capable craftsman, for he was striving with every effort to imitate his master. But whether it was the standing naked with the head uncovered at that season, or that he studied too much and suffered hardships, before the Bacchus was finished he went mad, copying the attitudes of that figure. And this he showed one day that it was raining in torrents, when Sansovino calling out, "Pippo," and he not answering, the master afterwards saw him mounted on the summit of a chimney, on the roof, wholly naked and striking the attitude of his Bacchus. At other times, taking a sheet or other large piece of cloth and wetting it, he would wrap it round his naked body, as if he were a model of clay or rags, and arrange the folds, and then, climbing up to some extraordinary place, and setting himself now in one attitude and now in another, as a prophet, an apostle, a soldier, or something else. He would have himself portrayed, standing thus for a period of 2 hours without speaking, not otherwise than as if he had been a motionless statue. Many other amusing follies of that kind poor Pippo played, but above all he was never able to forget the Bacchus that Sansovino had made, save only when he died a few years afterwards. But to return to the statue, when it was carried to completion, it was held to be the most beautiful work that had ever been executed by a modern master, seeing that in it Sansovino overcame a difficulty never yet attempted, in making an arm raised in the air and detached on every side, which holds between the fingers a cup all cut out of the same marble with such delicacy that the attachment is very slight, besides which the attitude is so well conceived and balanced on every side, and the legs and arms are so beautiful and so well proportioned and attached to the trunk, that to the eye and to the touch the whole seems more like living flesh, insomuch that the fame that it has from all who see it is well deserved, and even more. This work, I say, when finished, while Giovanni was alive, was visited in that courtyard in the Golfondo by everyone, native and stranger alike, and much extolled. But afterwards, Giovanni being dead, his brother Geraldo Bartolini presented it to Duke Cosimo, who keeps it as a rare thing in his apartments, together with other most beautiful statues of marble that he possesses. For the same Giovanni, Sansovino made a very beautiful crucifix of wood, which is in their house in company with many works by the ancients and by the hand of Michelangelo. In the year 1514, when festive preparations of great richness were to be made in Florence for the coming of Pope Leo X, orders were given by the Signora and by Giuliano de' Medici that many triumphal arches of wood should be made in various parts of the city, whereupon Sansovino not only executed the designs for many of these, but himself undertook in company with Andrea del Sarto to construct the façade of St. Maria del Fiore, all of wood, with statues, scenes, and architectural orders, exactly in the manner wherein it would be well for it to be, in order to remove all that there is in it of the German order of composition. Having therefore set his hand to this, to say nothing in this place of the awning of cloth that used to cover the Piazza of San Maria del Fiore and that of St. Giovanni for the festival of St. John, and for others of the greatest solemnity, since we have spoken sufficiently of this in another place. Beneath that awning, I say, Sansovino constructed the set façade in the Corinthian order, making it in the manner of a triumphal arch, and placing upon an immense base double columns on each side, and between them certain great niches filled with figures in the round that represented the apostles. Above these were some large scenes in half-relief, made in the likeness of bronze, with stories from the Old Testament, some of which are still to be seen in the house of the Lanfordini on the bank of the Arno, and over them followed architraves, friezes, and cornices, projecting outwards, and then frontispieces of great beauty and variety, and in the angles of the arches, both in the wide parts and below, were stories painted in chiaroscuro by the hand of Andrea del Sarto, and very beautiful. In short, this work of Sansovino's was such that Pope Leo, seeing it, said that it was a pity that the real façade of that temple was not so built, which was begun by the German Arnolfo. The same Sansovino made among these festive preparations for the coming of Leo X, besides the said façade, a horse in the round all of clay and shearings of woolen cloth, in the act of rearing, and under it a figure of 9 braccia upon a pedestal of masonry, which work was executed with such spirit and force that it pleased Pope Leo, and was much extolled by him. Wherefore, Sansovino was taken by Jacopo Salviato to kiss the feet of the Pope, who showed him many marks of affection. The Pope departed from Florence, and had a conference at Bologna with King Francis I of France, and then he resolved to return to Florence, whereupon orders were given to Sansovino that he should make a triumphal arch at the Porta of St. Gallo, and he, not falling back in any way from his own standard, executed it similar to the other works that he had done, namely, beautiful to a marvel, and full of statues and painted pictures wrought excellently well. His Holiness having then determined that the façade of St. Lorenzo should be executed in marble, the while that Raffaello da Urbino and Buonarroti were expected from Rome, Sansovino, by the order of the Pope, made a design for it, which, giving much satisfaction, Braccio d'Agnello was commissioned to make a model of it in wood, which proved very beautiful. Meanwhile, Buonarroti had made another, and he and Sansovino were ordered to go to Piazza Santa, where, finding much marble, but difficult to transport, they lost so much time that when they returned to Florence they found the Pope departed for Rome. Whereupon, both following after him with their models, each by himself, Jacopo arrived at the very moment when Buonarroti's model was being shown to His Holiness in the Torre Borgia. But he did not succeed in obtaining what he hoped, because, whereas he believed that he would at least make unto Michelangelo part of the statues that were going into that work, the Pope having spoken of it to him and Michelangelo, having given him so to understand, he perceived in arriving in Rome that Buonarroti wished to be alone in the work. Nevertheless, having made his way to Rome and not wishing to return to Florence without any result, he resolved to remain in Rome and there give his attention to sculpture and architecture. And so, having undertaken to execute for the Florentine Giovan Francesco Martelli a Madonna in marble larger than life, he made her most beautiful, with the child in her arms. And this was placed upon an altar within the principal door of St. Agostino, on the right hand as one enters. The clay model of the statue he presented to the Priori di Sosviati in Rome, which placed it in a chapel in his palace on the corner of the Piazza di San Pietro, at the beginning of the Borgo Novo. After no long lapse of time, he made for the altar of the chapel that the very Reverend Cardinal Alborenz had caused to be built in the Church of the Spaniards in Rome, a statue in marble of 4 braccia, worthy of no ordinary measure of praise, of a St. James, which has a movement full of grace and is executed with judgment and perfect art, so that it won him very great fame. And the while that he was executing these statues, he made the ground plan and model, and then began the building of the Church of St. Marcello for the Servant Friars, a work of truly great beauty. Continuing to be employed in matters of architecture, he built for Messer Marco Cofcia a very beautiful loggia on the road that leads to Rome, a Ponte Mole on the Via Appia, for the Company of the Crocifisso, attached to the Church of St. Marcello. He made a crucifix for carrying in procession, a thing full of grace, and for Cardinal Antonio di Monti, he began a great fabric at his villa without Rome, on the Aqua Vergine. And by the hand of Jacopo, perhaps, is a very beautiful portrait in marble of that elder Cardinal di Monti, which is now in the palace of Signor Fabiano at Monte Sansovino, over the door of the principal chamber of the hall. He directed also the building of the house of Messer Luigi Leone, a most commodious edifice, and in the Bracci, a palace beside the house of the Gaddi, which was brought forward by Filippo Strozzi, certainly a commodious and most beautiful fabric, with many ornaments. At this time, with the favor of Pope Leo, the Florentine colony had bestirred itself out of emulation of the Germans, Spaniards, and Frenchmen, who had either begun or finished the churches of their colonies in Rome, and had begun to perform their solemn offices in those already built and adorned. And the Florentines had sought leave likewise to build a church for themselves, for which the Pope, having given instructions to Lodovico Capone, the consul of the Florentine colony at that time, it was determined that behind the Banchi, at the beginning of the Strada Giulia, on the bank of the Tiber, an immense church should be built, to be dedicated to St. John the Baptist, which might surpass in magnificence, grandeur, cost, ornamentation, and design the churches of all the other colonies. There competed, then, in making designs for this work, Raffaello da Urbino, Antonio da San Gallo, Baldassare da Siena, and Sansovino, and the Pope, when he had seen all their designs, extolled as the best that of Sansovino, because, besides other things, he had made at each of the 4 corners of that church a tribune, and a larger tribune in the center, after the likeness of the plan that Sebastiano Serlio placed in his second book on architecture, whereupon all the heads of the Florentine colony, concurring with the will of the Pope, with much approval of Sansovino, the foundations were begun for a part of that church, altogether 22 canon in length. But there, being not enough space, and yet wishing to make the façade of the church in line with the houses of the Strada Giulia, they were obliged to stretch out into the stream of the Tiber at least 15 canna, which, pleasing many of them, because the grandeur as well as the cost was increased by making the foundations in the river. Work was begun on this, and they spent upon it more than 40,000 crowns, which would have been enough to build half the masonry of the church. In the meantime, Sansovino, who was head of this fabric, while the foundations were being laid little by little, had a fall and suffered a serious injury, and after a few days he had himself carried to Florence for treatment, leaving the charge of laying the rest of the foundations, as has been related, to Antonio da San Gallo. But no long time passed before the Florentine colony having lost by the death of Leo so great a support and so splendid a prince, abandoned the building for the duration of the life of Pope Adrian VI. Then, Clement having been elected, it was ordained, in order to pursue the same order and design, that Sansovino should return and carry on that fabric in the same manner wherein he had first arranged it, and so a beginning was made once more with the work. Meanwhile, Sansovino undertook to make the tomb of the Cardinal of Aragon and that of Cardinal Aragonese, and he had caused work to be begun on the marbles for the ornaments, and had made many models for the figures, and already Rome was in his hands, and he was executing many works of the greatest importance for all those lords, when God, in order to chastise that city and abate the pride of the inhabitants of Rome, permitted that Bourbon should come with his army on the 6th of May, 1527, and that the whole city should be sacked and put to fire and sword. In that ruin, besides many other beautiful intellects that came to an evil end, Sansovino was forced to his great loss to depart from Rome and to fly to Venice, intending from there to pass into France to enter the service of the king, whither he had already been invited, but halting in that city in order to make himself ready and provide himself with many things, for he was despoiled of everything. It was announced to the Prince Andrea Gritti, who was much the friend of every talent, that Jacopo Sansovino was there, whereupon there came to Gritti a desire to speak with him, because at that very time Cardinal Domenico Grimani had given him to understand that Sansovino would have been the man for the cupolas of St. Marco, their principal church, which, because of age and of weak foundations, and also from their being badly secured with chains, were all opening out and threatening to fall. And so he had him summoned. After many courtesies and long discussions, he said to Sansovino that he wished, or rather prayed him, that he should find a remedy for the ruin of those tribunes, which Sansovino promised to do, and to put it right. And so, having agreed to do the work, he caused it to be taken in hand, and having contrived all the scaffolding in the interior and made supports of beams after the manner of stars, he propped in the central hollow of woodwork all the timbers that sustained the vault of each tribune, and encircled them on the inner side with curtains of woodwork, going on them to bind them on the outside with chains of iron, to flank them with new walls, and to make at the foot new foundations for the piers that supported them, insomuch that he strengthened them vastly and made them forever secure, by doing which he caused all Venice to marvel, and not only satisfied Gritti, but also, which was far more, rendered his ability so clearly manifest to that most illustrious senate, that when the work was finished, the protomaster of the Lords Procurators of St. Mark being dead, which is the highest office that those lords give to their architects and engineers, they gave it to him, with the usual house and a passing handsome salary. Whereupon Sansovino, having accepted it most willingly, and freed his mind of all doubt, became the head of all their fabrics, with honor and advantage for himself. First, then, he erected the public building of the Mint, which he designed and distributed in the interior with so much order and method, for the convenience and service of the many artificers, that in no place is there a treasury ordered so well, or with greater strength than that one, which he adorned altogether in the rustic order, very beautifully, which method, not having been used before in Venice, caused no little marvel in the men of that city. Wherefore, having recognized that the genius of Sansovino was equal to their every need in the service of the city, they caused him to attend for many years to the fortifications of their state. Nor did any long time pass before he took in hand, by order of the Council of 10, the very rich and beautiful fabric of the Library of St. Marco, opposite to the Palazzo della Signoria, with such a wealth of carvings, cornices, columns, capitals, and half-length figures over the whole work, that it is a marvel, and it is all done without any sparing of expense, so that up to the present day it has cost 150,000 ducats, and it is held in great estimation in that city, because it is full of the richest pavements, stucco work, and stories, distributed among the halls of the building, with public stairs adorned by various pictures, as has been related in the life of Battista Franco, besides many other beautiful appurtenances, and the rich ornaments that it has at the principal door of entrance, which give it majesty and grandeur, making manifest the ability of Sansovino. This method of building was the reason that in that city, into which up to that time there had never entered any method save that of making their houses and palaces with the same order, each one always continuing the same things with the same measure and ancient use, without varying according to the sites as they found them, or according to convenience. This, I say, was the reason that buildings both public and private began to be erected with new designs and better order. The first palace that he built was that of Messer Giorgio Canaro, a most beautiful work, erected with all proper appurtenances and ornaments at a cost of 70,000 crowns, moved by which a gentleman of the Delfino family caused Sansovino to build a smaller one at a cost of 30,000 crowns, which was much extolled and very beautiful. Then he built that of Moro at a cost of 20,000 crowns, which likewise was much extolled, and afterwards many others of less cost in the city and the neighborhood. Wherefore it may be said that at the present day, that magnificent city, in the quantity and quality of her sumptuous and well-conceived edifices, shines resplendent, and is in that respect what she is through the ability, industry, and art of Jacopo Sansovino, who therefore deserves the highest praise, seeing that with those works he has been the reason that the gentlemen of Venice have introduced modern architecture into their city. In that not only has that been done there, which has passed through his hands, but also many, nay, innumerable other works, which have been executed by other masters, who have gone to live there and have achieved magnificent things. Jacopo also built the fabric of the loggia in the Piazza di San Marco, in the Corinthian order, which is at the foot of the campanile of the said St. Marco, with a very rich ornamentation of columns, and 4 niches, in which are 4 figures the size of life and in bronze, of supreme beauty, and that work formed, as it were, a base of great beauty to the said campanile, which at the foot has a breadth on one of the sides of 35 feet, which is about the extent of Sansovino's ornamentation, and a height from the ground to the cornice, where are the windows of the bells, of 160 feet. From the level of that cornice to the other above it, where there is a corridor, is 25 feet, and the other dado above is 28 feet and a half high. And from that level of the corridor to the pyramid, spire or pinnacle, whatever it may be called, is 60 feet. At the summit of that pinnacle, the little square upon which stands the angel is 6 feet high, and the said angel which revolves is 10 feet high, insomuch that the whole height comes to be 292 feet. He also designed and executed for the scuola, or rather, confraternity and company of the Misericordia, the fabric of that place, an immense building which cost 150,000 crowns, and he rebuilt the Church of St. Francesco della Vigna, where the Flet de Secoli had their seat, a vast work of much importance. Not for all this, The while that he has been giving his attention to so many buildings, has he ever ceased from executing every day for his own delight great and beautiful works of sculpture, in marble and in bronze? And over the holy water font of the friars of the Quadrangle, there is a statue executed in marble by his hand, representing a St. John the Baptist, very beautiful and much extolled. At Padua, in the chapel of the Santo, there is a large scene in marble by the same hand, with very beautiful figures in half-relief, of a miracle of St. Anthony of Padua, which scene is much esteemed in that place. For the entrance of the stairs of the palace of St. Marco, he is even now executing in marble, in the form of two most beautiful giants, each of 7 brachia, a Neptune and a Mars, signifying the power that is exercised both on land and on sea by that most illustrious republic. He made a very beautiful statue of a Hercules for the Duke of Ferrara, and for the Church of St. Marco he executed 4 scenes of bronze in half-relief, 1 braccio in height and 1.5 in length, for placing around a pulpit, and containing stories of that evangelist, which are held in great estimation for their variety. Over the door of the same St. Marco, he has made a Madonna of marble, the size of life, which is held to be a very beautiful thing. And at the entrance of the sacristy in that place, there is by his hand the door of bronze, divided into 2 most beautiful parts, with stories of Jesus Christ all in half-relief, and wrought excellently well. And over the door of the arsenal, he has made a very lovely Madonna of marble, who is holding her son in her arms. All which works not only have given luster and adornment to that republic, but also have caused Sansovino to become daily more known as a most excellent craftsman, and to be loved by those signori, and honored by their magnificent liberality, and likewise by the other craftsmen. For every work of sculpture and architecture that has been executed in that city in his time has been referred to him. And in truth, the excellence of Jacopo has well deserved to be held in the first rank in that city among the craftsmen of design, and his genius is rightly loved and revered by all men, both nobles and plebeians, for the reason that, besides other things, he has brought it about, as has been said, with his knowledge and judgment, that that city has been almost entirely made new, and has learned the true and good manner of building. But if she has received from him beauty and adornment, he, on the other hand, has received many benefits from her. Thus, in addition to other things, he has lived in her, from the time when he first went there to the age of 78 years, full of health and strength, and the air and that sky have done so much for him, that he does not seem, one might say, more than 40. He has had, and still has, from a most talented son, a man of letters, 2 grandchildren, one male and the other female, both of them pictures of health and beauty, to his supreme contentment. And what is more, he is still alive, full of happiness and with all the greatest conveniences and comforts that any man of his profession could have. He has always loved his brother craftsmen, and in particular, he has been very much the friend of the excellent and famous Tiziano, as he also was of Messer Pietro Aretino during his lifetime. For all these reasons, I have judged it well to make this honorable record of him, although he is still living, and particularly because now he is by way of doing little in sculpture. Sansovino had many disciples in Florence. Nicola, called Tribolo, has been related, and Solisomeo da Settigliana, who finished, with the exception of the large figures, the whole of the tomb in marble that is at Monte Cassino, wherein is the body of Piero de' Medici, who was drowned in the river Gagliani. His disciple likewise was Girolamo di Ferrara, called Lombardo, of whom there has been an account in the life of Benevento Garofalo of Ferrara, which Girolamo has learned his art both from the first Sansovino and from the second one in such a manner that, besides the work at Loreto of which we have spoken, both in marble and in bronze, he has executed many works in Venice. This master, although he came under Sansovino at the age of 30 and knowing little of design, being rather a man of letters and a courtier than a sculptor, although he had previously executed some works in sculpture, nevertheless applied himself in such a manner that in a few years he made the proficience that may be perceived in his works in half-relief that are in the fabrics of the library and the loggia of the Campanile of St. Marco, in which he acquitted himself so well that he was afterwards able to make himself alone the statues of marble and the prophets that he executed, as has been related, at the Madonna of Loreto. A disciple of Sansovino also was Jacopo Colonna, who died at Bologna 30 years ago while executing a work of importance. This Jacopo made for the Church of St. Salvador in Venice a nude St. Jerome of marble, still to be seen in a niche near the organ, which was a beautiful figure and much extolled. And for St. Croce della Giudecca, he made a Christ also nude and of marble, who is showing his wounds, a work of beautiful artistry. And likewise, for St. Giovanni Nuovo 3 figures, St. Dorothy, St. Lucia, and St. Catherine. In St. Marina may be seen a horse with an armed captain upon it, by his hand, and all these works can stand in comparison with any that are in Venice. In Padua, for the Church of St. Antonio, he executed in stucco the said saint and St. Bernardino, clothed. Of the same material he made for Messer Luigi Canaro a Minerva, a Venus, and a Diana, larger than life and in the round, in marble a Mercury, and in terracotta a nude Marzio as a young man, who is drawing a thorn from his foot, or rather, showing that he has drawn it out. He holds the foot with one hand, looking at the wound, and with the other hand seems to be about to cleanse it with the cloth, which last work, because it is the best that Jacopo ever did, the said Messer Luigi intends to have cast in bronze. For the same patron he made another Mercury of stone, which was afterward presented to Duke Federico of Mantua. Another disciple of Sansovino was Tiziano di Padova, a sculptor, who carved some little figures of marble in the loggia of the Campanile of St. Marco at Venice, and in the church of the same St. Marco there may be seen, likewise fashioned and cast in bronze by him, a large and beautiful cover for a basin in bronze, in the chapel of St. Giovanni. This Tiziano had made a statue of St. John, with which were the 4 evangelists and 4 stories of St. John, wrought with beautiful artistry for casting in bronze. But he died at the age of 35, and the world was robbed of an excellent and valiant craftsman. And by the same hand is the vaulting of the chapel of St. Antonio di Padova, with a very rich pattern of compartments in stucco. He had begun for the same chapel a grating of 5 arches in bronze, which were full of stories of that saint, with other figures in half-relief and low relief, but this also by reason of his death, and of the disagreement of those who had the charge of having it done, remained unfinished. Many pieces of it had already been cast, which turned out very beautiful, and many others were made in wax when he died, and for the said reason the whole work was abandoned. The same Tiziano, when Vasari executed the above-described decorations for the gentlemen of the Company of the Calza in Canario, made for that work some statues in clay and many terminal figures, and he was employed many times on ornaments with scenic settings, theaters, arches, and other such like things, whereby he won much honor, having executed works all full of invention, fantasy, and variety, and above all, with great rapidity. Pietro da Salo, also was a disciple of Sansovino, and after having toiled at carving foliage up to the age of 30, finally assisted by Sansovino, who taught him, he set himself to make figures of marble, in which he so delighted and studied in such a manner that in 2 years he was working by himself, to which witness is borne by some passing good works by his hand that are in the tribune of St. Marco, and the statue of a Mars larger than life that is in the façade of the Palazzo Pubblico, which statue is in company with 3 others by the hands of good craftsmen. He also made 2 figures for the apartments of the Council of 10, one male and the other female, in company with 2 others executed by Danese Cantoneo, a sculptor of high renown, who, as will be related, was likewise a disciple of Sansovino, which figures served to adorn a chimney piece. Pietro made, in addition, 3 figures that are at St. Antonio, in the round and larger than life, and these are a Justice, a Fortitude, and a statue of the Captain General of the Venetian forces, all executed with good mastery. He also made a statue of Justice in a beautiful attitude and with good design, which was placed upon a column in the Piazza of Murano, and another in the Piazza del Rialto in Venice, as a support for that stone where public proclamations are made, which is called the Gobbo di Rialto, and these works have made him known as a very good sculptor. For the Santo in Padua, he made a very beautiful Thetis, and a Bacchus who is squeezing a bunch of grapes into a cup, which figure, the most difficult that he have executed and the best, he left at his death to his children, who have it still in their house, seeking to sell it to him who shall best recognize and reward the labor that their father endured for it. Likewise, a disciple of Jacopo was Alessandro Vittorio of Trento, a most excellent sculptor and much the friend of study, who with a very beautiful manner has shown in many works that he has executed, as well in stucco as in marble, that he has a ready brain and a lovely style, and that his labors are worthy to be held in estimation. By the hand of this Alessandro in Venice, at the principal door of the library of St. Marco, are 2 great women of stone, each 10 palms high, which are full of grace and beauty and worthy to be much extolled. He has made 4 figures for the tomb of the Contarini in the Santo of Padua, 2 slaves, or rather captives, with a fame and a Thetis, all of stone, and an angel 10 feet high, a very beautiful statue, which has been placed upon the campanile of the Duomo in Verona. And to Dalmatia he sent 4 apostles also of stone, each 5 feet high, for the Cathedral of Trau. He made also some figures in silver for the Scolo of St. Giovanni Evangelista in Venice, which were all in full relief and rich in grace, and a St. Teodoro of 2 feet in silver in the round. For the chapel of the Grimani in St. Sebastiano, he wrought 2 figures in marble, each 3 feet high, and then he made a Pieta with 2 figures of stone held to be good, which are at St. Salvador in Venice. He made a Mercury held to be a good figure for the pulpit of the Palazzo di St. Marco, which looks out over the piazza. And for St. Francesco della Vigna, he made 3 figures large as life, St. Anthony, St. Sebastian, and St. Rocco, all of stone and full of beauty and grace and well wrought. For the Church of the Crocieri, he made in stucco 2 figures, each 6 feet high, very beautiful, which are placed on the high altar, and of the same material he made, as has been already told, all the ornaments that are in the vaulting of the new staircase of the Palazzo di St. Marco, with various patterns of compartments in stucco, with Battista Franco, afterwards painted in the spaces the scenes, figures, and grotesques that are there. In like manner, Alessandro executed the ornaments of the staircase of the library of St. Marco, all works of great mastery, and a chapel for the friars minors. And in the altarpiece of marble, which is very large and very beautiful, the Assumption of Our Lady in half relief, with 5 great figures at the foot, which have in them something of the grand, and are made with a beautiful manner, a lovely and dignified flow of draperies, and much diligence of execution, which figures of marble, St. Jerome, St. John the Baptist, St. Peter, St. Andrew, and St. Leonardo, each 6 feet high, are the best of all the works that he has done up to the present. And as a crown to that chapel, on the frontispiece, are 2 figures likewise of marble, each 8 feet high and very graceful. The same Vittoria has executed many portraits in marble, and most beautiful heads, which are good likenesses, such as that of Signor Giovan Battista Ferredo, placed in the Church of St. Stefano, that of Camillo Trevisano, the orator, placed in the Church of Saints Giovanni e Polo, the most illustrious Mark Antonio Gramani, likewise placed in the Church of St. Sebastiano, and in St. Gimignano, the rector of that church. He has also portrayed Messer Andrea Loredano, Monsieur Priano d'Alleghi, and 2 brothers of the Pellegrini family, Monsieur Vintenzio and Monsieur Giovan Battista, both orators. And since Vittoria is young and a willing worker, talented, amiable, desirous of acquiring name and fame, and lastly, very gentle, we may believe that if he lives, we are destined to see most beautiful works come from him, from day to day, worthy of his name of Vittorio, and that, if his life endures, he is like to be a most excellent sculptor, and to win the palm from all the others of that country. There is also one Tommaso di Lugano, a sculptor, who likewise has been many years with Sansovino, and has made with the chisel many figures in the library of St. Marco, very beautiful, in company with others, and then, having left Sansovino, he has made by himself a Madonna with the child in her arms, and at her feet a little St. John, which are all 3 figures of such beautiful form, attitude, and manner, that they can stand among all the other beautiful modern statues that are in Venice, which work is placed in the Church of St. Bastiano, and a portrait of the Emperor Charles V, which he made from the breast upwards of marble, has been held to be a marvelous thing, and was very dear to His Majesty. And since Tommaso has delighted to work rather in stucco than in marble or bronze, there are innumerable most beautiful figures by his hand and works executed by him in that material in the houses of various gentlemen of Venice. But it must suffice to have said this much of him. Of the Lombards, finally, it remains for us to make record of Jacopo Brestiano, a young man of 24, who is not long parted from Sansovino. He has given proof at Venice, in the many years that he has been there, of being talented and likely to prove excellent, as he has since shown in the works that he has executed in his native Brescia, and particularly in the Palazzo Pubblico. And if he lives and studies, there will be seen from his hand also things greater and better, for he has a fine spirit and most beautiful gifts. Of our Tuscans, one of the disciples of Sansovino has been the Florentine, Bartolomeo Almanati, of whom record has already been made in many places in this work. This Bartolomeo, I say, worked under Sansovino in Venice, and then in Padua for Messer Marco di Montovo, a most excellent doctor of medicine, in whose house he made an immense giant from more than 1 piece of stone for his court, and his tomb with many statues. Afterwards, Almanati, having gone to Rome in the year 1550, there were allotted to him by Giorgio Vasari 4 statues of marble, each of 4 braccia, for the tomb of the old Cardinal di Monti, which Pope Julius III had allotted to Giorgio himself, in the Church of St. Pietro a Montorio, as will be related, which statues were held to be very beautiful. Wherefore Vasari, having conceived an affection for him, made him known to the said Julius III, who, having ordained what he wanted done, caused him to be set to work, and so both of them, Vasari and Ammanati, worked together for a time at the Vigna. But not long afterwards, when Vasari had gone to serve Duke Corsino in Florence, the above-named pope being dead, Ammanati, who found himself without work and badly recompensed by that pontiff for his labors in Rome, wrote to Vasari, praying him that, even as he had assisted him in Rome, so he should assist him in Florence with the Duke. Whereupon Vasari, occupying himself with fervor in this matter, introduced him into the service of the Duke, for whom he has executed many statues in marble and in bronze that are not yet in position. For the Garden of Castello, he has made 2 figures in bronze larger than life, namely, a Hercules who is crushing Antaeus, from which Antaeus, in place of his spirit, there issues from the mouth water in great abundance. Finally, Ammanati has executed in marble the colossal figure of Neptune that is in the piazza, 10 braccia and a half in height. But since the work of the fountain, in the center of which the said Neptune is to stand, is not finished, I shall say nothing more of it. The same Ammanati, as architect, is giving his attention with much honor and praise to the fabric of the Pitti, in which work he has a great opportunity to show the worth and grandeur of his mind, and the magnificence and great spirit of Duke Cassino. I could tell many particulars of this sculptor, but since he is my friend, and another, so I hear, is writing his history, I shall say no more, in order not to set my hand to things that may be related by another, better than I perhaps might be able. It remains for us to make mention, as the last of Sansovino's disciples, of Danance Cantaneo, the sculptor of Carrara, who was already with him in Venice when still a little boy. Parting from his master at the age of 19, he made himself a boy of marble for St. Marco, and a St. Lawrence for the Church of the Friars Minor, for St. Salvador another boy in marble, and for Saints Giovanni e Polo, the statue of a nude Bacchus, who is grasping a bunch of grapes from a vine which twines round a trunk that he has behind his legs, which statue is now in the house of the Mazzanighi at St. Barnaba. He has executed many figures for the Library of St. Marco and for the Loggia of the Campanile, together with others of whom there has been an account above, and, in addition to those named, the 2 that have been mentioned already as being in the apartments of the Council of 10. He made portraits in marble of Cardinal Bembo and Contineri, the Captain General of the Venetian forces, which are both in St. Antonio at Padua, with rich and beautiful ornaments about them, and in the same city of Padua, in St. Giovanni di Vadaro, there is by the same hand the portrait of Messer Girolamo Garganti, a most learned jurist, and for St. Antonio della Guidaca, in Venice, he has made a very lifelike portrait of Giustiano, the lieutenant of the Grand Master of Malta, and of Tepalo, who is 3 times general, but these have not been set in their places. But the greatest work and the most distinguished that Danance has ever executed is a rich chapel of marble, with large figures, in St. Anastasia at Verona, for Signor Icole Fregoso, in memory of Signor Geno, one Lord of Genoa, and then Captain General of the Venetians, in whose service he died. This work is of the Corinthian order, in the manner of a triumphal arch, and divided by 4 great columns round and fluted, with capitals of olive leaves, which rest upon a base of proportionate height, making the space in the center as wide again as one of those at the sides, with an arch between the columns, above which there rest on the capitals the architrave and cornice, and in the center, within the arch, a very beautiful decoration of pilasters, with cornice and frontispiece, and with the ground formed by a tablet of most beautiful black basanite, where there is the statue of a nude Christ, larger than life and in the round, a very good figure, which statue stands in the act of showing the wounds, with a piece of drapery bound round the flanks and reaching between the legs to the ground. Over the ankles of the arch are signs of his passion, and between the columns that are on the right side, it stands upon a pedestal a statue in the round representing Signor Geno Fregoso, fully armed with the antique, save that he shows the arms and legs nude, and he has the left hand upon the pommel of the sword at his girdle, and with the right hand he holds the general's baton, having behind him as a pendant, within the space between the columns, a Minerva in half relief, who, poised in the air, holds with one hand a ducal staff, such as that of the Doges of Venice, and with the other a banner containing the device of St. Mark. Between the two other columns, as the other pendant, is military valor in armor, on her head the helmet crest, with the house leek upon it, and on her cuirass the device of an ermine that stands upon a rock surrounded by mire, with letters that run, Poetis Mori Cari Fodari, and with the device of the Fregosi, and above is a victory, with a garland of laurel and a palm in the hands. Above the columns, architrave, frieze, and cornice, is another range of pilasters, upon the crowns of which stand two figures of marble in the round, and two trophies likewise in the round, and of the same size as the figures. Of these two statues, one is Fame in the act of taking flight, pointing with the right hand to heaven, and with the trumpet that she is sounding, and this figure has light and most beautiful draperies about the body, and all the rest nude. The other, representing Eternity, is clothed in heavier vestments, and stands in majesty, holding in the left hand a round on which she is gazing, and with the right hand she grasps a hem of her garment, wherein are globes that signify the various ages, with the celestial sphere encircled by the serpent that seizes the tail in the mouth. In the central space above the great cornice, which forms and separates those two other spaces, are three steps upon which are seated two large nude boys, who hold a great shield with the helmet above it, containing the devices of the Fregosi, and below the steps is an epitaph of basanite with large gilded letters. That whole work is truly worthy to be extolled, but Denantz executed it with great diligence, and gave beautiful proportion and grace to the composition, and made each figure with great study. And Denantz is not only, as has been described, an excellent sculptor, but also a good and much extolled poet, as his works clearly demonstrate, on which account he has always had intercourse in straight friendship with the greatest men and choicest spirits of our age, and of this may serve as a proof the work described above, executed by him with much poetic feeling. By the hand of Denis is the nude statue of the sun above the ornament of the well in the courtyard of the Mint, at Venice, in place of which Signori desired a justice, but Denantz considered that in that place the sun is more appropriate. This figure has a bar of gold in the left hand, and in the right a scepter, at the end of which he made an eye, and about the head the rays of the sun, and above all the globe of the world encircled by the serpent that holds the tail in the mouth, with some little mounds of gold above the globe, generated by him. Denantz would have liked to make two other statues, that of the moon for silver and another for copper, with that of the sun for gold. But it was enough for those Signori that there should be that of gold, as the most perfect of all the metals. The same Denantz has begun another work in memory of Prince Leodano, Doge of Venice, wherein it is hoped that in invention and fantasy he is to surpass by a great measure all his other labors, which work is to be placed in the Church of Saints Giovanni e Polo in Venice. But since this master is alive and still constantly at work for the benefit of the world and of art, I shall say nothing more of him, nor of other disciples of Sansovino. I will not omit, however, to speak briefly of some other excellent craftsmen, sculptors, and painters from that dominion of Venice, taking my opportunity from those mentioned above, in order to make an end of speaking of them in this life of Sansovino. Vicenza, then, has likewise had at various times sculptors, painters, and architects, of some of whom record was made in the life of Vittore Scarpaccio, and particularly of those who flourished in the time of Mantegna, and learned to draw from him, and such were Bartolomeo Montagna, Francesco Verba, and Giovanni Speranza, all painters, by whose hands are many pictures that are dispersed throughout Vicenza. Now, in the same city, there are many sculptures by the hand of one Giovanni, a carver and architect, which are passing good, although his proper profession has been to carve foliage and animals, as he still does excellently well, although he is old. In like manner, Girolamo Peroni of Vicenza has executed praiseworthy works of sculpture and painting in many places in his city. But among all the masters of Vicenza, he who most deserves to be extolled is the architect Andrea Palladio, from his being a man of singular judgment and brain, as many works demonstrate that were executed by him in his native country and elsewhere, and in particular the Palazzo della Carbonita, a building much renowned, with 2 porticos composed in the Doric order, with very beautiful columns. The same Palladio has erected a palace, beautiful and grand beyond all belief, with an infinity of the richest ornaments, for Count Octavio di Vieri, and another like it for Count Giuseppe di Porto, which could not be more beautiful or magnificent, nor more worthy than it is of no matter how great a prince, and another is being built even now for Count Valerio Ciccati, under the direction of the same master, very similar in majesty and grandeur to the ancient buildings so much extolled. For the Counts of Valmorana, likewise, he has now carried almost to completion another most superb palace, which does not yield in any particular to any of those mentioned above. In the same city, upon the piazza commonly called the Isola, he has built another very magnificent fabric for Signor Valerio Chiricati, and at Pugliano, a place in the Vicentino, a most beautiful house for the Chevalier, Signor Bonifacio Pugliani. In the same territory of Vicenza, at Finale, he has erected another fabric for Messer Biagio Saracenti, and one at Bagnola for Signor Vittorio Pisani, with a large and very rich court in the Doric order, with most beautiful columns. Near Vicenza, at the township of Luceria, he has constructed for Signor Giovan Francesco Valmorano another very rich edifice, with 4 towers at the corners, which make a very fine effect. At Mileto, likewise, for Count Francesco Trissino and Lodovico, his brother, he has begun a magnificent palace upon a hill of some eminence, with many ranges of loggie, staircases, and other appurtenances of a via. At Campiglia, likewise in the Vicentino, he is making for Signor Mario Ripetta another similar habitation, with so many conveniences, rich apartments of rooms, loggie, staircases, and chambers dedicated to various virtues, that it will be, one once carried to completion, an abode rather for a king than for a nobleman. At Loneto, he has built another, in the manner of a villa, for Signor Giuliano di Godi, and at Angarano another for Count Jacopo Angarano, which is truly most beautiful, although it appears a small thing to the great mind of that lord. At Quinto, also near Vicenza, he erected not long ago another palace for Count Mark Antonio Thierry, which has in it more of the grand and the magnificent than I could express. In short, Palladio has constructed so many vast and lovely buildings within and without Vicenza that, even if there were no others there, they would suffice to make a very handsome city with most beautiful surroundings. In Venice, the same Palladio has begun many buildings, but one that is marvelous and most notable among them all, in imitation of the houses that the ancients used to build, in the monastery of the Carita. The atrium of this is 40 feet wide and 54 feet long, which are exactly the diameters of the quadrangle, the wings being 1/3 and a half of the length. The columns, which are Corinthian, are 3 feet and a half in thickness and 35 feet high. From the atrium one goes into the peristyle, that is, into a cluster, for thus do the friars call their courts, which, on the side, towards the atrium, is divided into 5 parts, and at the flanks into 7, with 3 orders of columns one above the other, of which the Doric is at the foot, and above it the Ionic and the Corinthian. Opposite to the atrium is the refectory, 2 squares in length, and as high as the level of the peristyle, with its orifices around it, all most commodious. The stairs are spiral, in the form of an oval, and they have neither wall nor column, nor any part in the middle to support them. They are 13 feet wide, and the steps by their position support one another, being fixed in the wall. This edifice is all built of baked stone, that is, of brick, save the bases of the columns, the capitals, the imposts of the arches, the stairs, the surface of the cornices, and the whole of the windows and doors. The same Palladio has built for the Black Friars of St. Benedict in their monastery of St. Giorgio Maggiore in Venice, a very large and most beautiful refectory with its vestibule in front, and has begun to found a new church, with such beautiful ordering, according as the model shows, that if it is carried to completion, it will prove a stupendous and most lovely work. Besides this, he has begun the façade of the Church of St. Francesco della Vigna, which the very Reverend Grimani, Patriarch of Aquileia, is causing to be made of Istrian stone, with the most magnificent disregard of expense. The columns are 4 palms thick at the foot, 40 palms high, and in the Corinthian order, and already the whole basement of the foot is built. At Cambarari, a place 7 miles distant from Venice, on the river Brenta, the same Palladio has made a very commodious habitation for Monsieur Niccolo and Monsieur Luigi Foscari, gentlemen of Venice. Another he has built at Morocco, a place in the Mestrino, for the Chevalier Messinino. At Piombino, one for Monsieur Giorgio Cornaro, one at Montagnana for the magnificent Monsieur Francesco Pisani, and another at Chignone, in the territory of Padua for Count Adorato di Tien, a gentleman of Vicenza. At Udine, in Friuli, he has built one for Signor Floriano Antomini. At Moto, a township likewise in Friuli, one for the magnificent Monsieur Marcosino, with the most beautiful court and porticos all the way round. And at Fratta, a township in the Polesine, a great fabric for Signor Francesco Bottaiaro, with some very beautiful and fantastic loggie. In like manner, Near Asolo, a place in the territory of Treviso, he has erected a most commodious habitation for the Very Reverend Saint Damella Barbara, Patriarch-elect of Aquileia, who has written upon Vitruvius, and for the most illustrious Monsieur Marc Antonio, his brother, with such beautiful ordering that nothing better or greater can ever be imagined. Among other things, he has made there a fountain very similar to that which Pope Julius caused to be made at his Vigna Julia in Rome, with ornaments of stucco and paintings everywhere, executed by excellent masters. In Genoa, Monsieur Luca Giustiano has erected a building with the design of Palladio, which is held to be very beautiful, as are also all those mentioned above. But it would have made too long a story to seek to recount the many particulars of the strange and lovely inventions and fantasies that are in them. But since there is soon to come into the light of day a work of Palladio, in which will be printed 2 books of ancient edifices, and 1 book of those that he himself has caused to be built, I shall say nothing more of him, because this will be enough to make him known as the excellent architect that he is held to be by all who see his beautiful works. Besides which, being still young and attending constantly to the studies of his art, every day greater things may be expected of him. Nor will I admit to say that he has wedded to such gifts a nature so amiable and gentle that it renders him well beloved with everyone. Wherefore he has won the honor of being accepted into the number of academicians of design in Florence, together with Danens, Giuseppe Salviati, Tintoretto, and Battista Farinato of Verona, as will be told in another place, speaking of the said academicians. Bonifacio, a Venetian painter, of whom I have never before received any information, is also worthy to be numbered in the company of these many excellent craftsmen, being a well-practiced and able colorist. This master, besides many pictures and portraits that are dispersed throughout Venice, has executed for the altar of the relics in the Church of the Servetes, in the same city, an altarpiece, wherein is a Christ with the apostles about him, and Philip, who appears to be saying, Domini, ostendi nobis patrum, which is painted with a very good and beautiful manner. And for the altar of the Madonna in the Church of the Nuns of the Spiritu Santo, he has executed another most beautiful altar picture, with a vast number of men, women, and children of every age, who, in company with the Virgin, are adoring a God the Father, who is in the air with many angels about him. Another painter of passing good name in Venice is Jacopo Sansovino, who has painted on the doors of the organ in the Church of the Ingesuati the Blessed Giovanni Colombini receiving his habit in the consistory from the Pope, with a good number of cardinals. Another Jacopo, called Basilica, has executed an altarpiece with Saint Maria Maggiore in Venice, wherein is Christ in the air with many angels, and below him Our Lady with the apostles. And one Fabrizio Veneziano has painted on the façade of a chapel in the Church of St. Maria Sebanico the consecration of the baptismal font, with many portraits from life executed with beautiful grace and a good manner. Notes. 1. Line 1. The family of the Tati in Florence is recorded in the books of the commune from the year 1300, because, having come from Lucca, a very noble city of Tuscany, it was always abundant in industrious and honored men, and they were most highly favored by the house of Medici. Of this family was born Jacopo, of whom we are writing in this place, and he was born from Antonio, a most excellent person, and from his wife Francesca, in the month of January 1477. In the first years of his boyhood he was set, as is usual, to learn his letters, And after beginning to show in these vivacity of brain and readiness of spirit, not long afterwards he applied himself of his own accord to drawing, giving evidence in a certain sort that nature was inclining him much more to this kind of work than to letters, for the reason that he went very unwillingly to school and learned much against his will the scabrous rudiments of grammar. His mother, whom he resembled strongly, perceiving this and fostering his genius, gave him assistance, causing him to be taught design in secret, because she loved the thought that her son should be a sculptor, perchance in emulation of the then rising glory of Michelangelo Buonarroti, who at that time was still quite young, and also moved by a certain fateful augury, in that Michelangelo and this Jacopo had been born in one and the same street, called Via St. Maria, near the Via Ghibellina. Now the boy, after some time, was placed to learn the trade of a merchant, in which delighting even less than in letters, he did and said so much, that he obtained leave from his father to attend without hindrance to that towards which he was urged by nature. There had come to Florence at that time Andrea Contucci of Monte Sansovino, a township near Arezzo, risen to great fame in our days from having been the birthplace of Pope Julius III, which Andrea, having acquired in Italy and in Spain the name of the best sculptor and architect that there was in art after Buonarroti, was staying in Florence in order to execute 2 figures of marble, etc. 2. Line 18. And he was executing many works of the greatest importance for all those lords, having been recognized by 3 pontiffs, and especially by Pope Leo, who presented him with the knighthood of St. Pietro, which he sold during his illness, doubting lest he might die, when God, etc. 3. Line 22. Having then entered on that office, he began to occupy himself with every care, both in regard to buildings and in the management of the papers and of the books that he held by virtue of his office, acquitting himself with all possible diligence in the affairs of the Church of San Marco, of the commissions, which are a great number, and of the many other matters that are in the charge of those procurators. And he showed extraordinary lovingness towards those signori, in that, having turned his whole attention to benefiting them, and to directing their affairs to the aggrandizement, embellishment, and ornamentation of the church, the city, and the public square, a thing never done by any other in that office. He provided them with various advantages, profits, and revenues by means of his inventions, with his ingenuity of brain and readiness of spirit, yet always with little or no expense to the signori themselves, among which benefits one was this. In the year 1529, there were between the 2 columns in the piazza some butcher's stalls, and also between the one column and the other many wooden cabins to accommodate persons in their natural necessities, a thing most filthy and disgraceful, both for the dignity of the palace and of the Piazza Publica, and for the strangers who, coming into Venice by way of St. Giorgio, saw first of all on arrival that filthiness. Jacopo, after demonstrating to the Prince Gritti the honorable and profitable nature of his design, caused those stalls and cabins to be removed, and placing the stalls where they are now, and making certain places for the sellers of herbs, he obtained for the procurators an additional revenue of 700 ducats, embellishing at the same time the piazza and the city. Not long afterwards, having perceived that in the Mercurio, on the way to the Rialto, near the clock, by removing a house that paid a rent of 26 ducats, a street could be made leading into the Spadario, whereby the rent of the houses and shops all around would be increased. He threw down that house and increased their revenues by 150 ducats a year. Besides this, by placing on that site the hostelry of the Pellegrino and another in the Campo Rossolo. He brought them in another 400 ducats. He obtained for them similar benefits by the buildings of the Pescaria, and on divers other occasions by many houses and shops and other places belonging to those signori at various times, insomuch that the procurators, having gained by his care a revenue of more than 2,000 ducats, has been rightly moved to love him and to hold him dear. Not long afterwards, by order of the procurators, he set his hand to the very rich and beautiful building of the library, opposite to the Palazzo Pubblica, with such a variety of architecture, for it is both Doric and Corinthian, and such a wealth of carvings, cornices, columns, capitals, and half-length figures throughout the whole work, that it is a marvel, and all without any sparing of expense, since it is full of the richest pavements, stucco work and scenes throughout the halls of that place, and public staircases adorned with various pictures, as has been related in the life of Battista Franca, not to speak of the appurtenances and rich ornaments that it has at the principal door of entrance, which give it majesty and grandeur, demonstrating the ability of Sansovino, which method of building was the reason that in that city, into which there had not entered up to that time any other method but that of building their houses and palaces in one and the same order, each man always continuing the same things with the same measurements and ancient use, without varying according to the sites as they found them, or according to convenience. It was the reason, I say, that buildings both public and private began to be erected with new designs in better order, and according to the ancient teaching of Vitruvius, and that work, in the opinion of those who are good judges and have seen many parts of the world, is without any equal. He then built the palace of Messer Giovanni Delfino, situated on the Grand Canal on the other side from the Rialto, opposite to the Riva del Ferro, at a cost of 30,000 ducats. He built likewise that of Messer Leonardo Moro at St. Girolamo, a work of great cost, which has almost the appearance of a castle. And he erected the palace of Messer Luigi di Garzoni, wider by 13 paces in every direction than is the Fondaco di Tedeschi, with so many conveniences that water runs through the whole fabric, which is adorned with 4 most beautiful figures by Sansovino, which palace is at Ponte Casale, in the neighborhood of Venice. But the most beautiful is the palace of Messer Giorgio Camaro, on the Grand Canal, which, without any doubt surpassing the others in convenience, majesty, and grandeur, is considered perhaps the finest that there is in Italy. He also built, to have done with speaking of private edifices, the Scuola or Confraternity of the Misericordia, a vast work costing 130,000 crowns, which, when carried to completion, will prove to be the most superb edifice in Italy. And his work also is the Church of St. Francesco della Vigna, where the Frati di Soccoli have their seat, a work of great size and importance. But the façade was by another master. The loggia about the campanile of St. Marco, in the Corinthian order, was from his design, with a very rich ornament of columns, and with 4 niches, in which are 4 supremely beautiful figures in bronze, little less than the size of life, which are by his hand, together with various scenes and figures in low relief. That work makes a most beautiful base to the said campanile, which has a thickness on one of the sides of 35 feet, which is about the extent of Sansovino's ornamentation. In height, from the ground to the cornice, where are the windows of the bells, it is 160 feet, from the level of that cornice to the other above it, where the corridor is, 25 feet. and the other dado above has a height of 28 feet and a half. From that level of the corridor up to the pyramid is 60 feet, at the summit of which spire the little square upon rests the angel is 6 feet high, and the said angel, which turns with every wind, is 10 feet high, insomuch that the whole height comes to be 292 feet. But the finest, richest, and strongest of his edifices is the Mint of Venice, all of iron and stone, for there is not in it one single piece of wood, in order to render it absolutely safe from fire, and the interior is distributed with such order and convenience for the sake of the many artificers, that there is not in any part of the world a treasury better ordered, or with greater strength than that one, which he built entirely in the rustic order, and very beautiful, which method, not having been used before in that city, caused the inhabitants to marvel not a little. By his hand also may be seen the Church of St. Spirito on the lagoons, of a very delicate and pleasing workmanship, and in Venice there is the façade of St. Gimignano, which gives splendor to the piazza. In the Maccaria, the façade of St. Giuliano, and in St. Salvador, the very rich tomb of the Prince Francesco Vernero. He also erected in the Rialto on the Grand Canal the new fabrics of the vaults, with such good design that almost every day there assembles there a very convenient market of townsmen and of other persons who flock to that city. And a very marvelous thing and new was that which he did for the Tiepoli of the Misericordia, in that, they having on the canal a great palace with many regal chambers, and the whole building being badly founded in the water, so that it was likely enough that in a few years the edifice would fall to the ground, Sansovino rebuilt all the foundations in the canal below the palace with very large stones, maintaining the house on its feet with a marvelous support of props, while the owners lived in their house with perfect security. Nor for all this, while he has given his attention to so many buildings, has he ever ceased to occupy himself every day for his own delight with vast and beautiful works of sculpture, in marble and in bronze. Over the holy water font of the friars of the Ca' Grande, there is by his hand a statue made of marble, representing St. John the Baptist, which is very beautiful and highly extolled. At Padua, in the chapel of the Santo, there is a large scene in marble by the same hand, with very beautiful figures in half-relief, of a miracle of St. Anthony of Padua, which is much esteemed in that place. For the entrance of the stairs of the palace of St. Marco, he is even now executing in marble in the forms of two very beautiful giants, each of 7 braccia, a Neptune and a Mars, signifying the power which the most illustrious republic has on land and sea. He made a most beautiful statue of Hercules for the Duke of Ferrara, and for the Church of St. Marco, he made 6 scenes of bronze in half-relief, 1 braccia high and 1.5 long, but placing on a pulpit, with stories of that evangelist, which are held in much estimation for their variety. Over the door of the same St. Marco, he made a Madonna of marble, the size of life, which is held to be a very beautiful thing. And at the entrance to the sacristy of that place, there is by his hand the door of bronze divided into 2 most beautiful parts, with stories of Jesus Christ all in half-relief and wrought excellently well. And over the door of the arsenal, he made a very beautiful Madonna, who is holding her son in her arms of marble. All which works not only have given luster and adornment to that republic, but also have caused Sansovino to be better known every day as an excellent craftsman, and loved and honored by the magnificent liberality of those signori, and likewise by the other craftsmen. Every work of sculpture and architecture that has been executed in that city, in his time, being referred to him. And in truth, the excellence of Jacopo has well deserved that he should be held in the first rank among the craftsmen of design in that city, and that his talent should be loved and revered by all without exception, both nobles and plebeians, for the reason that, besides other things, as has been told, with his judgment and knowledge, he has brought it about that the city has been made almost entirely new and has learned the true and good method of building. 3 most beautiful figures in stucco by his hand also may be seen in the possession of his son, one a Laocoon, another a Venus standing, and the third a Madonna with many children about her, which figures are so rare that in Venice there is seen nothing to equal them. The said son also is in drawing 60 plans of temples and churches of Sansovino's invention, which are so excellent that from the days of the ancients to our own, there have been seen none better, conceived, or more beautiful. These I have heard that the son will publish for the benefit of the world, and already he has had some pieces engraved, accompanying them with designs of the numberless labors that have been carried into execution by Sansovino in various parts of Italy. For all this, although occupied, has been related with the management of so many things, both public and private, and both in the city and abroad, but strangers also ran to him for models and designs of buildings, for figures or for counsel, as did the Duke of Ferrara, who obtained a Hercules in the form of a giant, the Duke of Mantua, and the Duke of Urbino. He was always very zealous in the private and particular service of each of his own lords procurators, who, availing themselves of him both in Venice and elsewhere, and not doing a single thing without his assistance or counsel, kept him continually at work, not only for themselves, but also for their friends and relatives, without any reward, he consenting to endure any inconvenience and fatigue in order to satisfy them. But above all, he was greatly loved and held in infinite price by the Prince Gitti, who delighted in beautiful intellects, by Messer Vittorio Grimani, brother of the Cardinal, and by Messer Giovanni de' Leggi the Chevalier, all procurators, and by Messer Mark Antonio Giustiniano, who became acquainted with him in Rome. For these illustrious men, exalted in spirit and truly regal in mind, being conversant with the affairs of the world and well informed in the noble and excellent arts, soon recognized his merit and how worthy he was to be cherished and esteemed, and availed themselves of him in due measure. And they used to say, in accord with the whole city, that the procurators never had and never would have at any time another equal to him, for they knew very well how celebrated and renowned his name was with the men and princes of intellect in Florence and Rome and throughout all Italy. And everyone held it as certain that not he only, but also his descendants and all his posterity, deserved to be endowed forever in return for his singular genius. Jacopo was in body of ordinary stature, without any fat, and he walked with the person upright. He was white in complexion, with the beard red, and in his youth he was very graceful and handsome, and therefore much beloved by various women of some importance. After he became old, he had a venerable presence, with a beautiful white beard, and walked like a young man, insomuch that, having come to the age of 93, he was still very strong and healthy, and could see every least thing, however distant it might be, without spectacles. And when writing he kept his head erect, not bending over at all as is done by others. He delighted to dress handsomely, and was always very neat in his person, and he always took pleasure in women down to extreme old age, and much loved to talk of them. In his youth, by reason of his excesses, he was not very robust, but when he had become old he never suffered any illness, insomuch that for a period of 50 years, although at times he felt indisposed, He would never avail himself of any physician. Nay, having had an apoplectic stroke for the fourth time at the age of 84, he recovered by staying only 2 months in bed in a very dark and warm place, despising medicines. He had so good a stomach that he was not afraid of anything, making no distinction between food that might be good and food that might be harmful. And in summer, he lived almost entirely on fruits, eating very often as many as 3 cucumbers at a time, and half a citron, in his extreme old age. As for qualities of mind, he was very prudent and foresaw future events in the matters of the present, weighing them against the past, and he was zealous in his affairs, not considering any fatigue, and never left his business to follow pleasures. He discoursed well and with many words upon no matter what subject that he understood, giving many illustrations with much grace, on which account he was very dear both to the great and to the small, and to his friends. And in his last years he had a memory still very fresh, and remembered in detail his childhood, the sack of Rome, and many things, fortunate or unfortunate, that he experienced in his time. He was courageous, and from his youth took delight in contending with those greater than himself, because, he used to say, by contending with the great, a man advances, but against the little he lowers himself. He esteemed honor above everything in the world, wherefore in his affairs he was most loyal and a man of his word, and so pure in heart that no offer, however great, could have corrupted him, although he was put to the test several times by his signori, who for this or for other qualities regarded him not as their protomaster or minister, but as a father and brother, honoring him for his goodness, which was in no way feigned but real. He was liberal with every man, and so loving towards his relatives that he deprived himself of many comforts in order to assist them, although he lived always in repute and honor as one who is observed by everyone. At times he let himself be overcome by anger, which was very great in him, but it soon passed, and very often with a few humble words you could make the tears come to his eyes. He had a surpassing love for the art of sculpture, such a love, indeed, that, to the end that it might be dispersed widely in various parts, he formed many disciples, making, as it were, a seminary of that art in Italy. Among these, very famous were Niccolo Tribolo and Solus Mayo, Florentines, Denance Cantaneo of Carrara, a Tuscan, of supreme excellence in poetry as well as in sculpture, Girolamo di Ferrara, Jacopo Colonna of Venice, Luca Lancia of Naples, Tiziano di Padova, Pietro da Solo, Bartolomeo Almorato of Florence, at the present-day sculptor and protomaster to the great Duke of Tuscany, and finally Alessandro Vittorio of Trento, a rare master in portraits of marble, and Jacopo di Medici of Brescia, who, reviving the memory of the excellence of their master, have employed their talents on many honored works in various cities. Sansovino was much esteemed by princes, among whom Alessandro di Medici, Duke of Florence, sought his judgment in building the citadel of that city, and Duke Cassino in the year 1540, Sansovino having gone on his affairs to his native city, not only sought his counsel in the matter of that fortress, but also strove to engage him in his service, offering him a good salary, and on his return from Florence, Duke Ercole of Ferrara detained him about his person and proposed various conditions to him, making every effort to keep him in Ferrara. But he, being used to Venice, and finding himself comfortable in that city, where he had lived a great part of his life, and having a singular love for the procurators, by whom he was so much honored, would never listen to any of them. He was also invited by Pope Paul III, who wished to advance him to the charge of St. Pietro in the place of Antonio da San Gallo, And with this, Monsignor della Casa, who was then legate in Venice, occupied himself much. But all was in vain, because he said that he was not minded to exchange the manner of life of a republic for that of living under an absolute prince. And King Philip of Spain, on his way to Germany, showed him much kindness at Peschiera, whither Jacopo had gone to see him. He had an immoderate desire of glory, and by reason of that used to spend his own substance on others, not without notable harm to his descendants, in the hope that there might remain some memory of him. Good judges say that although he had to yield to Michelangelo, yet in certain things he was his superior, thus in the fashioning of draperies, in children, and in the expressions of women. Jacopo had no equal, for the reason that his draperies in marble were very delicate and well executed, with beautiful folds and curves that revealed the nude beneath the vestments. His children he made tender and soft, without those muscles that adults have, and with their little arms and legs as if of flesh, insomuch that they were in no way different from the life, and the expressions of his women were sweet and pleasing, and as gracious as could be, as is clearly seen from various Madonnas made by him in many places, of marble and in low relief, and from his statues of Venus and other figures. Now this man, having thus become celebrated in sculpture and in architecture, a master without a rival, and having lived in the grace of mankind and also of God, who bestowed upon him the genius that made him illustrious, as has been related, when he had come to the age of 93, feeling somewhat weary in body, took to his bed in order to rest, in which having lain without any kind of suffering, although he strove to rise and dress himself as if well, for a period of a month and a half, feeling little by little, he asked for the sacraments of the Church, which having received, while still hoping to live a few years, he sank gradually and died on the 2nd of November in the year 1570. And although in his old age he had run the whole course of nature, yet his death was a grief to all Venice. He left behind him his son Francesco, born at Rome in the year 1521, a man learned both in the law and in the humanities, from whom Jacopo saw 3 grandchildren born, a male child called, like his grandfather, Jacopo, and 2 female, one called Fiorenza, who died to his infinite grief and sorrow, and the other Aurora. His body was borne with much honor to his chapel in St. Girmiano, where there was erected to his memory by his son the marble statue made by Jacopo himself while he was alive, with the epitaph given below in memory of his great worth. Jacopo Sansovino Florentino, Chi Romi Giulio II, Leone 10th, Clementi 7th, Pont Max, Maxine Gratus, Venetius Architecturae Sculpturesque Intermortuum, Decus Primus et Certivit, Cica e Senator ob Examian Virtutum Liberalita, Honestatis, Sumo Servatitus, Morae Decidus, Francisco P. Hockmon, P. Vixit An, 903, Ob V. Cal Dec, 1570. His obsequies were likewise celebrated publicly at the Frari by the Florentine colony, with no slight pomp, and the oration was delivered by Messer Camillo Buonopigli, an excellent man.